Good morning and welcome to another exciting match in the 2026 staging of the Public Sector Debate Competition. We're absolutely delighted to have you with us here at Saxthorpe in our offices, and we're equally thrilled to have our audience online. Welcome. I'm Aniki Clark, Communication Lead in the TIU, and it's my pleasure to be your host for this match. If you're just joining us, you missed a most exciting match just now where the National Environment and Planning Agency secured their spot in the quarterfinals. We now have, continuing the action, Team Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining in proposition. Give them a round of applause. And the Teaching Service in opposition. They will be debating the moot of great interest. Be it resolved that the incorporation of the Office of the Political Ombudsman into the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, the ECJ, is regrettable. Be it, I agree, and the arguments I'm sure will be equally strong. Be it resolved that the incorporation of the Office of the Political Ombudsman in the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, the ECJ, is regrettable. As mentioned, we have Team Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining in proposition and the Teaching Service in opposition. Let's get to meet the teams, starting with Team Proposition. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning. Gregory Thomas, first speaker.
Good morning, judges. Good morning, everyone. Shalika Darby, second speaker.
Morning. Terry Wright, reply speaker.
Thank you, Team MAFM. Let's just say Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. The acronym sometimes, play on the brain. All right, now we've met Team Proposition. Let's get to meet Team Opposition, Teaching Service.
Hello, my name is Kevin Grant.
I am Rasheen Nelson.
And I'm Tevin Cameron.
Thank you very much, Team Opposition. It's just one female amongst all these. Look at that. Yes, which nice, Jermaine. We'll get now to meet the judges with an almost all-female panel, but the chair adjudicator is a male.
Thank you, Aniki. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jermaine Barrett. I'll be the chief adjudicator, the chair adjudicator rather, for this match. Really looking forward to an exciting exchange of ideas and arguments.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kalita T. Vassal. I'll be serving as a wing adjudicator. Thank you, Aniki. Good morning.
I know it's been a long morning, right?
Yes, it certainly has. But I'm certain this morning won't only be long, but it shall be exciting with the matchup that we have ahead of us. All the best, teams.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chantal Hughes, and I'm serving as a wing adjudicator for this match. I want to say congratulations to both teams for making it this far, and all the best in this contest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, judges. And indeed, congratulations are in order because 13, we're now at 16, and then we get to 18, and it takes quite a bit of work and dedication and commitment to get to this part of the competition. So we look forward, Team Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining, and the Teaching Service, to your bringing your greatest game yet, because I don't want to use the term knockout, but this is the round where one of you will go home, unfortunately, and the other will advance to the next round. And at this point, I will hand over to Jermaine, who will marshal the match. All that's left for me to say is good luck, teams.
Thank you, Madam Clark. Ladies and gentlemen, the teams are very much aware of the rules, but you, our viewing audience, might not be so informed. So I'll go ahead and just remind you and inform you of those rules. Each team has 3 debaters, and each speaker has a different amount of time within which they'll be delivering their presentations. The first speaker on each team will speak for 7 minutes. The second speaker speaks for 6 minutes. The third and final speaker presents their speech within 5 minutes. After the first two debaters have concluded their presentations, we'll continue with an exciting period of cross-examination. We'll have another such period after the second pair of speeches have been delivered. Thereafter, we'll pause for 1 minute, and we will, after the 1 minute pause, resume with the reply speaker from Team Opposition, and that's the teaching services. Then we will have the concluding speech in our debate from the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. Now, teams, please please take cognizance of the time signals. You'll hear the ding of a bell signaling you've spoken for 1 minute, another ding signaling that you have 1 minute remaining, two dings indicating that you have consumed the allotted time. But we're kind, so we give you 15 seconds extra as a grace period, at which point you will hear continuous dinging of the bell, signaling that you really should stop and make way for the continuation of the debate. In between the first and second dings, points of information are allowed. In fact, they are very much encouraged, and so we ask for that to unfold during those segments. Points of information, though, only apply to the first and second speakers on each team. The third speaker is not permitted to accept any points of information. Therefore, we don't expect that any will be offered in the third or the reply speeches. All right? Teams, are you ready? All right, so with that, we make welcome the first speaker from the proposition team representing the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. Hear, hear.
Honorable adjudicators, good morning. I rise to affirm the proposition. I will begin by defining the key term and briefly set out the context for this debate. Firstly, regrettable. When we hear that word, we mean harmful in consequences, even when well-intentioned. The Office of the Political Ombudsman was created in 2002 as an independent, neutral body to oversee political conduct and mediate disputes between political actors. Its functions are now being performed by the ECJ, the Electoral Commission of Jamaica. That change has generated public concern, including warnings from civil society advocates about the implication for neutrality, accountability, and public confidence. A failure to properly support or fill one office is an administrative problem. It is not proof that the office itself is unnecessary. Now on to our first argument. Our first argument is that the transfer improperly conflates the roles and risks contaminating the neutrality of the ECJ. Our claim to this is that the political ombudsman works directly within political sensitive disputes and must often make contestable judgments. The role is inherently sensitive because it's an adversarial role by nature. The functions of the ECJ and the political ombudsman therefore require different institutional roles and modes of operation. They have different job descriptions, different technical competencies, and different competing areas of focus.
On that point?
Not at this time. Ombudsman polices political conduct, code of conduct, investigates allegations of political misconduct, and mediates political disputes. By contrast, the ECJ administers Jamaica's electoral process and safeguards the fairness, legality, and credibility of elections.
On that point, and the Act itself does allow for the ECJ to police the administration of those elections.
Thank you. I'm happy that you mentioned that you referred to the administration of the elections. We'll take it from there in our debate. The transfer is regrettable because it collapses two distinct functions into one institution. In doing so, it exposes the ECJ to partisan controversy and weakens the appearance of neutrality, upon which legitimacy depends. The ECJ's authority depends not only on fairness, in fact, but on public confidence in that fairness. Once the institution responsible for administering election is also drawn into policing political conduct, it becomes more vulnerable to perceptions of bias and political entanglement. The concern is not speculative. Civil society bodies, including Jamaicans for Justice, have warned that transferring these functions may compromise the ECJ's neutrality and damage public confidence in the Commission. That matters because electoral institutions derive legitimacy not from fairness in fact, but from being widely perceived as fair. For that reason, honorable judges, we cannot lightly risk public confidence in an institution that has played an important role in supporting trust and stability in Jamaica's electoral process. Once the ECJ becomes associated with policing political conduct, political actors may begin to view it through a partisan lens. That is harmful even when no actual bias exists, because in electoral governance, the appearance of impartiality in of itself is part of legitimacy. That question, therefore, is not merely whether the ECJ can perform the task, but whether it should be placed in a position where its impartiality may be reasonably questioned. The impact of this is serious erosion of public confidence in the ECJ, and that, in turn, threatens confidence in the electoral process and weakens democratic legitimacy. As a supporting authority, let's hear what Errol Miller, a former ECJ chairman, had to say. He warns us of the commissioners being asked to perform both constitutional electoral functions and that the ombudsman role could create a conflict of open office, especially where there's heightened pressures in and around the period of elections. And this takes me into my second argument, my honorable judges. My claim is that the absorption of the political ombudsman functions into the ECJ is regrettable because democratic institutions should retain distinct functions rather than be absorbed into one another. The opposition may argue, not at this time, the opposition may argue that the ECJ's credible past justifies the expansion, but past successes in electoral administration does not prove suitability for politically contentious oversight, and instead what has occurred is that the state has weakened a separation upon which democratic legitimacy depends. A functioning democracy requires checks and balances. When one institution absorbs another's oversight role, the system loses institutional distance. Instead of having one body monitor political conduct and another administer the elections, the same entity now is performing both tasks. This weakens the core of our democratic safeguard, honorable judges. The opposition may place undue emphasis on efficiency, but efficiency must not come at the expense of balance, restraint, and of course, credibility. Democratic institutions are not designed merely for convenience. They are designed to distribute power and preserve accountability and protect public confidence. The Office of the Political Ombudsman served as a buffer between the political actors and the electoral machinery, allowing the ECJ to remain focused and impartial. The merger creates three distinct harms. It weakens the checking functions, it erodes specialization, and it concentrates too much politically sensitive authority in one institution. Weakened checking function. When one institution absorbs the other's oversight role, the system loses institutional distance. Instead of having one body monitor the political conduct and the other administer elections, we know that it performs both tasks. Loss of specialization. Complaint handling mechanism and political code enforcement requires different habits, different judgment, institutional culture from election administration. And when we talk about concentrated authority, where too many political sensitive responsibilities are concentrated, one institution becomes more exposed to criticism, pressure, and distrust. When the single body, thank you.
We thank the first proposition speaker representing team, Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. Ladies and gentlemen, now we make way for the first opposition speaker representing the teachers, teaching services. Let us make them welcome to opening the opposition's case. Here.
Mr. Speaker, panel, the team proposition is already losing this match because this match is a regrets motion. And why they came up here and told us a myriad of reasons why they regret the status quo, it is also their burden and responsibility to advocate for the reverting of what is happening now and going back to what used to obtain when the quote-unquote powers were separate. They have so far not done so, and it is probably almost too late for them to do it further. Now, Mr. Speaker, let us address, first of all, the idea that the roles are different. Now, like the average Jamaican citizen, I did not really understand what the Office of the Political Ombudsman was. And perhaps that is why they were afraid to talk about what used to obtain pre-2014 or 2024 when they were merged. It's because back then, people already perceived the role as unimportant, unimpactful, and biased.
On that point.
And so there is, not yet. And so what we want to look at is that, first of all, the roles, when you read both acts, were actually not different. In fact, the ECJ Interim Act already allowed for the ECJ to police the administration of political elections.
On that point.
The act literally says that the ECJ has the power, I'll take you in a bit, has the power to investigate and make decisions. That is critical, Mr. Speaker. Make decisions when they found that what they've investigated bear merit.
On that point.
The key difference between the office back then and what obtains post-2024 is that the Political Ombudsman office in their world was only powerful enough to recommend to the very people they were investigating what they ought to do. But the ECJ already had the power to not recommend, but to take actions against any individual, party, or supporters of the party that were found in breach of the rules that the ECJ itself had to create. That's a key difference, and I don't think they've contended with that difference. They have to advocate for a world where it is bad that the office can not only investigate and recommend actions, but the office now, in status quo, has the power to actually take actions against individuals whom they found to be guilty of foul play. I'll take 1 point from second speaker.
You are limiting the understanding of the ECJ and the Political Ombudsman.
Thank you. I am not.
Conflating.
When you read the act exactly as it is, the act literally says to you that the ECJ has the power to investigate and take actions. The Ombudsman has the power to investigate and recommend to the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister what actions they think they should take. At the end of the day, in fact, it was Mark Golding who literally said at one point when recommendations was given to him that the buck actually stops with him. There was no power in the office pre-2024 to do anything. No, they argued some things, and I firstly want to run through, before we talk about the matter of bias, this critical thing, a matter of efficiency, Mr. Speaker. Now, obviously, having established that the two roles bore similar responsibilities in the beginning, from all time and even now, then it is more efficient to run the functions of the Ombudsman when it is centralized in this one office. One, because in their world, the Ombudsman actually complained about the lack of power to do what it needed to do. In fact, their act actually required the Ombudsman to solicit the help of the political leaders to investigate the things that they need to investigate. Now, what could go so? But the ECJ itself has the manpower to investigate and does not have to rely on the leaders of the parties to get the information they need and to take action. More than that, Mr. Speaker, it's also more efficient from a financial perspective. If both already have the same role, then what was the point in their world back then that they need to advocate for? People complained about the point of paying the Political Ombudsman to do something that the ECJ already had the power to do. They need to explain why they think their case is more important than the government spending more money in other areas needed when they had in their world two people doing the same thing, except the difference being one had the power to actually do something about what they investigate. Now, let us talk about quickly their idea of the perception of bias. Now, the idea of the perception of bias, they contend, is that you somehow thwart the perfect reputation of the ECJ. And we understand where this comes from. But at the end of the day, what makes more sense, and I'm a math teacher, by the way, so think carefully about it. Isn't it more likely that one individual is more likely to engage in bias actions as opposed to a commission of 9 individuals? Literally, in order for bias to prevail in our world, you would have to sway 5 other commissioners who were elected or selected using the very same process of their world, where the Prime Minister and the opposition leader would have to agree on these individuals to function as commissioners. That was the case in their world in selecting the ombudsman. The only difference now is that the buck doesn't stop, or rather, the decision of recommendation doesn't rest in one person, it rests in 9 people, and not just 9 pia people. In their world, when the cases get serious and the ombudsman needs to do some serious work, they had to consider getting a tribunal of judges to function with the ombudsman. That already exists in the ECJ case, where the 9 commissioners are usually former judges who are automatically out of order, who are automatically harder to make subjected to bias. In other words, the ECJ functioning in the status quo is less likely to be the subject of bias or to engage in bias actions. I thank you.
We thank the first opposition speaker for that very voluminous presentation. Yes. I think the whole nation was standing and listening. Yes. We continue now with the cross-examination, the first segment of cross-examination. In this segment, the opposition team now gets a chance to ask 3 questions of the proposition team. Let's get that started. Team Teaching Services, you may begin.
So, given the changes that have occurred in the administration of the role of the Ombudsman since 2024, how do you therefore regret this move?
Because it has not solved the problem. The issue that the minister pointed to was that there is actually no measure of enforcement or capacity to actually enforce the recommendations of the ombudsman. That move has not changed the fundamental problem, and it has not provided the strengthening neither to the ECJ nor the ombudsman's role beyond moving it over to a new house.
I did say in light of the changes and the positives that have arisen. Next question. No, I'm saying moving to the next question. The structure of the ECJ prevents biases clearly because there are 9 commissioners as opposed to a single individual without any known bias operating in this office. Isn't our proposition better than the status quo?
Thank you for reaffirming the ignorance of your first speaker. We have 9 commissioners and 4 of them are actually politically appointed on either side. Do you understand that one of those members can block even an investigation into their party? You are spreading lies and things that should not be said.
Is the proposition contending that a world where the political ombudsman can only recommend what should be done is better than the world where the ECJ is already empowered to act? How is your world leading to better results?
The fact that the mood states regret does not mean that we are recommending a reversion to the status quo. We are regretting the decision to include the Office of the Political Ombudsman in the Office of the ECJ. We have different ways that we can propose to you where this can operate without that inclusion. For example, a commission can actually report to the public political ombudsman, who can in turn look at the recommendations of the commission and make decisions.
And just for clarity, when we say we regret this motion, we're not saying that we're going to go back to the status quo as it exists. That would be redundant. We are going to fix the problems that have made us make that decision in the first place so that we can have a better outcome as opposed to the one that we have now with that move.
All right, thank you. Wow, this is proceeding nicely. We now call upon the proposition team to ask their 3 questions of the opposition team.
Are you against the government's admission that this decision was rushed and perhaps could have benefited from further ventilation had it not been for them trying to have something done before the general election, the local government election?
So the rush only came in response to meeting the deadline for the local government elections in 2024. Before that, there was due process, years of due process, according to the portfolio minister. It's the hiccups that came in the last minute that were sought to be rushed over in order to meet the deadline. So there was no rush in general, but in the last.
In other words, there was no problem with the overall idea to merge the 2 offices, right? And quite frankly, it doesn't matter what the government thinks. We are here debating whether or not this is a regrettable motion. And the challenge that you must present to us now is that if it is regrettable, then it means that you prefer automatically what obtained before. You don't get to create a hypothetical world where you fix before. In fact, judges, you should accept that that is a very admission that what they had before could not work.
Point of order.
And that today is much better.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Mr. Speaker, kindly contain. Since the office was moved to the ECJ, what key deliverables can you point to that the role of the Ombudsman has made in the improvement of compliance with the Code of Conduct, which is a fundamental responsibility?
The ECJ noted that it has received and addressed reports and complaints from the public. Adding to that, it wrote to the general secretaries of political parties regarding removal of flags, paraphernalia, and all of that following the local government and central government elections. These are things that the Ombudsman's office would have struggled with before and struggled to get them to comply. The ECJ has done that.
In fact, in addition to that, they have launched a
order, Chairman,
campaign that allows them to be able to share with the public what the role of the Ombudsman is. Never existed in your world.
Which one? Given the technically distinct workloads and job descriptions of each office, is the average man foolish in reasoning that adding the Ombudsman's workload to the commissioners without new resources or training risks both responsibilities being neglected or done poorly?
First of all, the flaw in the question is that there is no addition of roles. When you read both acts, they are literally doing the same thing from day one. The roles are pretty similar. So that's the first flaw in the argument. Secondly, I have to take what the ECJ itself says. The ECJ said that it was already positioned and able to do the work that has been tasked to them. Moreover, they've been able to do it even better than the political ombudsman before. How often have you heard outcries from the politicians about foul play? In fact, never before has the politicians voted against a recommendation from the ECJ. But we have a case where the current Prime Minister at the time, NP, did not even respect the Ombudsman's decision at the time enough to shake his hand when the Ombudsman was trying to mediate between issues.
Thank you very much. I feel like we could do some mediation here between these two teams. I mean, this is intense. Thank you. We continue our debate now with the presentation of the second proposition speaker, who represents the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. Let's make them welcome. Here.
Mr. Speaker, Honorable House, I join my colleagues this morning on the side of reason and the common man. I must first address the glaring inconsistencies in the argument brought by Team Opposition. They want to convince you that this House regrets motion bottlenecks us into only agreeing with going back to the status quo of where we're coming from. Mr. Speaker, it is not beyond us to make a decision and to determine that the decision and the way the decision was made was regrettable. It is not beyond the side of proposition to advocate firmly that the decision and the way the decision was made was regrettable. Therefore, them trying to pigeonhole us into saying, oh, we must go back to the status quo, Mr. Speaker, that is not only a very silly and unfortunate attempt at child's play reasoning, but essentially, Mr. Speaker, it underlines what we have outlined so far. We're not advocating for us to be reversed back to the status quo. What we are arguing was that the problem fundamentally in treating with the office of the Ombudsman had a lot to do with enforcement. We want to protect the office in law. We needed stronger powers. Please pause. We wanted to have greater enforceability, even to provide fines or power to deal with public censure. Our responsibility was never to go back. Quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, that is only the first error that they made. Their second error was in conflating the roles of the Ombudsman and the ECJ. Mr. Speaker, let me bring you back to common sense and reasoning and fact. Ombudsman's responsibility was specifically in relating to police, the policing of the code of conduct in and outside of elections. Their argument has been limited and bottlenecked into the powers of the ECJ to treat with elections and policing. Mr. Speaker, that is only part and parcel of their reasoning. It is not part and parcel of the fundamental responsibility of the Office of the Political Ombudsman to the people of Jamaica to investigate allegations of political misconduct and to mediate political disputes. That is a lie they're trying to sell you cheaply, and quite frankly, it is actually embarrassing. The ECJ administers Jamaica's political process and safeguards fairness, legitimacy, and credibility of elections. Those two distinct powers are separate and important. Mr. Speaker, my first speaker would have, of course, laid the foundation, and I want to continue. On our side, it is regrettable because the way the decision was made was a non-solution to a real problem. What was needed was legislative strengthening to command greater respect and enforcement, an impartial leader who is strong and commands the authority of the office, and at the very best has the power to provide censure and fines. Even the minister in his interviews after the decision stated that the office was considered limited because of enforcement powers. Something stronger was needed than moral suasion. This is agreement that the solution to the problem was to strengthen the office. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that my colleague here and I share a love for football, because the office was operating like a referee with a whistle, not even with carding power. Every referee has some disciplinary action capability, whether to call fouls or to do verbal warnings or penalties, red card or yellow card, or verbal warnings or even ejections. So we regret, Mr. Speaker, even with the move to the ECJ, there is no greater power or resources or legislative strength to enforce decisions from the role of the Ombudsman, leading no greater compliance or accountability on the part of the politicians with the code of conduct. Go ahead.
If you say the problem was lack of power and the merger fixes the power, then what exactly is there to regret?
No, that's exactly what we're saying. The merger does not fix the power. Quite frankly, what you don't seem to understand is that the role of the political ombudsman and the role of the ECJ, quite frankly, when it comes to the enforcement of the code of conduct, even when you have merged it into the ECJ, they have no greater strength to enforce the code of conduct. Where is the legislative transference of those powers for censure? Where is the legislative transference for powers regarding fines? None of that was done. The strength you're talking about has not changed the status quo before we got here. No greater power was transferred to the ECJ to treat with the fundamental problems. Mr. Speaker, as I continue, there's a greater understanding that the code of conduct needed to be supported by enforcement, and the opposition continues to gaslight you and undermine your intelligence. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, not only has this not solved the core problem, but it has taken us backward. It has created a greater problem. How? It has neutralized the decision-making capacity of the office. Mr. Speaker, rather than a single decision-maker, as they have told us in their world, they now have 9 commissioners who hold the power indivisible. Mr. Speaker, I work in international law. Quite frankly, what that creates is enshrinement of the principle of consensus. This is actually a recommendation upon which now every member, each member must agree before anything can be agreed. Consensus in principle means nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Nothing is agreed until everyone has agreed. The Electoral Commission's constitution has 4 members who are politically appointed, and because they are indivisible, one member of that commission who is politically appointed can even block an investigation into whether or not political misconduct is ongoing. Can you imagine that they're trying to tell you that this is a better response when there's a veto power and it's built on consensus with politically appointed commissioners? That is laughable. Mr. Speaker, again, can they not hear the cries of our citizens asking what is happening? Is there a greater code of conduct? Are they even blind pointing to deliverables? Are they blind to the numerous campaign signs that are still sprawled throughout our country, even though our election stopped in 2025? Where is the greater code of conduct that is being adhered to? You're lying. Colleagues, this is a debate, and I love debate, but quite frankly, they're gambling with the truth. They are gambling with the truth. Mr. Speaker, what we're asking for is not a joke. The ex-leader of the ECJ has said, this is the worst constitutional decision, that has brought us back generations, back to 1962. The worst legislative decision affecting the electoral processes and the laws that have been passed by the Jamaican Parliament. That is not us. That's the ex-head of the ECJ. Take it from the horse's mouth. We thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Deputy Proposition Speaker. We now go to the second speaker on Team Opposition to hear them advance the opposition's case. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, I want to start with a bit of honesty. I must posit to you that our opponents did make a valid point in trying to do so when they say that there's no legislative power that was given to the ECJ with this move. We agree with that, but we want you to understand that the issue is not one that will damage our case, because the ECJ now takes on the powers of the political ombudsman. But before that, the ECJ had already had the powers to make punitive actions against political actors, not just to administer elections. Section 6 of that interim act speaks to this power. So they have absorbed the role of the political ombudsman, and they are still able to function and carry out this more efficiently, as you would have seen since the passing of 2 elections since this move has been done. So they characterize them as a referee without a red card in powers. We want you to understand that the very structure of the ECJ is what makes it efficient in answering the question of bias, and they seem to characterize the ECJ as being so overburdened that it's not able to take on these things. Let's look at the structure. There are 9 commissioners who by law are recognized as commissioners or as the ombudsman in indivisible. These 9 must agree, as they would have stated. It's no decision can be made unless all agree, and that is true. And because of this, this reduces the appearance of bias. In addition to that, the ECJ is not overburdened to the point where it cannot take on this role, because we have proven since the change that it has become more efficient and has far advanced the rights and responsibilities that were so entrusted to him. So with this move, the Office of the Political Ombudsman's role is now subsumed by the ECJ, and the powers that existed before protect this function of our democracy. I want to look at the fact that it enhances democratic outcomes, and I want to share with you, this is a positive precedent for institutional reform. So, we want you to understand that to regret something means that you're saying that it results in less positive outcomes. So they are saying that to regret this move is to say that the standalone yet toothless Office of the Political Ombudsman is a better watchdog than the efficient, esteemed ECJ. Let's look at the challenge on independence. Independence does not come from a separate office building.
On that point.
Independence does not come from a separate title. Independence comes from, I'll take you shortly, legal protections, transparency mechanisms, and operational safeguards, none of which have been lost since the merger of these entities. If a separate institution were enough to guarantee independence, then merely creating agencies would automatically create accountability, which clearly is not true. The same legal obligation and public expectations remain, and they remain enshrined in its constitutional mandate. The ECJ's bipartisan structure will and has proven to actually create greater insulation from partisan influence, the very structure of the system, because it already operates through established procedures and broad political scrutiny. Additionally, mature democracies such as Ireland and Fiji often merge overlapping oversight structures because fragmentation creates inefficiency. The question is whether citizens receive better service, not whether institutional boundaries remain untouched. Independence is determined by safeguards, not by office addresses. We look at accountability, and we want you to understand that government, they glorify this fragmentation as accountability. Multiple institutions do not automatically produce better oversight. Sometimes multiple institutions produce duplicated work, confusion over responsibility, bureaucratic delays, agencies blaming one another, which we have seen in the past, and in this case, and the government never explains why a weak structure existing beside a stronger structure is a better model than when the stronger structure is given the power to carry out what the weaker structure was not able to do, which already exists based on the demands of their world. So consolidation can actually increase accountability because citizens know exactly where responsibility lies, and the ECJ is not beyond reproach. Well, look, let's look at it. It sets a precedent for positive institutional reform. When we look at what exists, the government has not told us why existing safeguards will definitely fail. And we have seen since the last 2 elections that it works. Institutional reform should be judged on a case-by-case basis. If future mergers become harmful, citizens, parliament, courts, whatever, can oppose them. Their precedent is one where every reform becomes impossible. That's dangerous, because apparent independence is more important to them than actual reform. The ECJ, with its 9 commissioners, the ECJ, which has since its implementation had done many things to modernize the methods in which it carries out its function, is definitely a better watchdog. So what we see is that we as a country have sat down and assessed an institution based on its efficiency as a national oversight institution in the context of the obvious need for enhanced powers and greater reach. After answering that question, what we have said is, who is better able to be the watchdog? And since we have answered that question, we have chosen efficiency and positive outcomes over maintaining institutional fragmentation. That sets a precedence where we can sit, analyze our institutions, see if it can be better modified, and instead of saying, oh, maintaining different addresses is more important than anything else, we can say we move for efficiency, we move for enhancement of the outcomes for our citizens, and that we believe is most important. If nothing else matters in this debate, the precedence matters.
Here, here.
We thank the second speaker on team opposition for that submission. We now move to the second segment of cross-examination. In this segment, we are going to invite first the proposition team, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining, to submit their questions, and of course the opposition team will respond.
Are you suggesting that the ECJ is able to investigate and was able to take action against political actors in and outside of election cycles concerning the code of conduct? In all circumstances?
Yes. The Act itself provides for the ECJ to investigate and take action on all matters that may be perceived to have an impact on the democratic processes that are engaged in election. So, for example, if two political parties are at odds outside of an election year, and it is perceived that the behaviors that they have, that they are exemplifying, will have a negative impact on the democracy and the election process when election time comes, the ECJ has powers over that. But even if you don't buy that, the reality is, if you are concerned about that, then the merger fixes that problem. The fact that they are now merged, it does give the ECJ the power to do what you think, if you think it never used to have it before. But it does that in addition to the fact that it fixes your problem of the political ombudsman previously not having the power to take action. Now that it's merged, it is solving the question you are asking right now, plus it was solving the problem that you identified.
Thank you.
How exactly does it solve the problem without strengthening the efficiency of the PO role in and of itself through legislation? How?
Well, first of all, it's not true that it doesn't strengthen the role. Earlier you asked that question, and Roshane mentioned to you the fact that in the past two elections, they have mediated and addressed in cases of disagreements between political parties. In addition to that, the office in the status quo now was able to do what the political ombudsman for decades was not able to do before. People never understood its role and did not think it important. But the ECJ had the machinery, the power, and the finances to embark on a public education campaign that apprised people of the role and the functions of the ombudsman. So how is it improving the function of the political ombudsman? It's increasing awareness of the function. It's making people better aware of what it is. And from the last two elections, it is handling the interactions in a far better way. Because you will admit there have been less outcries when it comes to foul play.
Are you therefore saying that there is nothing to regret with the decision to include the political ombudsman role in the office of the ECJ?
That's your job to tell us what it is there to regret. And so far, the things that you are presenting as the issues to regret, we have sufficiently addressed them. The issue of bias is less bias when you have 9 commissioners dealing with it. To respond to her point earlier, 4 of them are, of course, 2 from one side party, 2 from the other side. But there are 5 people who are former judges who they must be able to sway in order to create this bias. 2, we've addressed the whole idea of the power. You admitted that in the world that you must advocate, the PO did not even have the power to take action. And we shared with you that the legislation pre-merger and post-merger already allowed the ECJ to take actions on its own.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We thank the teams for this period of questions and answers. We now continue as we make welcome the questions from the opposition side posed to the proposition team. Here.
So given the ECJ Act gives powers to investigate all matters that have impact on the electoral process, whether in or outside of election season, isn't it conceivable that in the off-election season, the ECJ can and will investigate matters it thinks will have bearing on it?
What you have failed to understand is that the political code of conduct and the role of the political ombudsman transcended elections. And all that you have talked about is just how the ECJ had power to investigate misconduct relating to elections. What we have argued is that the office of the political ombudsman needed to be strengthened to not only investigate, but to enforce the recommendations that are being put forward as a neutral oversight body with legitimate responsibility of maintaining accountability for our politicians regarding political code of conduct in and outside of elections. You continue to conflate and mislead this House in this argument relating to elections and the power to investigate misconduct relating to elections. Kindly stop.
Given that you posited a situation where a commission is created that reports to the individual ombudsman, how then is the construct of the ECJ as is regrettable when you posited that function?
We have outlined to you that there are 9 commissioners who hold this responsibility indivisible. It creates a consensus-based decision-making model which is proven internationally and even nationally to be the slowest process to any kind of decision-making and transformation. You have 2 of the political directors who are actually on the JLP, 2 of the political directors who are on the PNP. Of course, 40% of the directors are actually politically appointed. So of course the decisions can be blocked by simply one. One can determine that they do not want the investigation to happen, and they can block the decision. We have told you before that this model of holding the commission, as a matter of fact, the minister himself had suggested that the path forward, the first path forward the ministry wanted was for one commissioner to be appointed, even if it was within the ECJ. How do you go against that?
So then, is the proposition advocating for a world where speed is prioritized over the quality of investigation and actual actions being taken when investigations find people wanting?
I am so grateful that you're making your own case in the fact that you literally have been arguing for efficiency over actual accountability this entire debate. What we have been saying to you is that your decision-making model is flawed. It will not yield to any outcome whatsoever, as we have actually seen. All of these examples you're pointing to, of course, this is a debate, so I won't fact-check you publicly, but you know half of those examples have not yielded any credible or transformative outcomes beyond what would have happened under the ombudsman. There was no transfer of power to fine or to really hold these politicians accountable. Where is censure taking place? How many signs are still up right now from 2025? How many politicians have been fined for those things? Stop making up poppy-smick arguments when the evidence is there in the sight of the political people that there is still significant non-compliance with the political code of conduct inside and outside of elections.
All right, so we're grateful for those questions and answers, and we're particularly grateful that we're at the point where we take a break. So we're going to do just that, taking a 1-minute pause, allow us to inhale and calm ourselves ahead of the reply speeches. All right, so teams, your 1-minute pause begins now. Yes, unfortunately, that signals the end of the 1-minute pause. Let's continue our debate now with the presentation from the reply speaker from the teaching services team advancing the opposition's case. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, the motion before this House is, be it resolved that the incorporation of the Office of the Political Ombudsman into the Electoral Commission of Jamaica is regrettable. Keyword, regrettable. From the very beginning of this debate, government had one burden to carry. They needed to prove to this House and Jamaica that Jamaica's democracy became weaker because of this incorporation. They needed to prove that the previous standalone ombudsman structure protected electoral integrity better than the integrated framework which now exists under the ECJ. Because throughout this debate, government defended the appearance of accountability while opposition proved accountability capable of action. Government gave this House emotional attachment to institutional separation. First, Mr. Speaker, what I'll do is that, one, whether elections are better protected through recommendations or enforceable oversight was a clash, and secondly, whether democracy functions better through fragmented institutions or coordinated governance. On both classes, opposition actually wins this debate. Let me begin with the first clash, recommendations versus enforceable oversight. Government repeatedly glorified the old political ombudsman as an independent democratic watchdog. However, our first speaker, Kevin, exposed the fatal weakness in that model. Under the pre-2024 framework, the Ombudsman could investigate, report, and recommend, but had no meaningful authority, which means he had no teeth to directly act on findings. Accountability, therefore, depended heavily on political goodwill. If political actors ignore recommendation, the institution itself became largely powerless. Mr. Speaker, a watchdog that can only complain about misconduct without meaningful restraining misconduct is not strong democratic protection, it is democratic theater. Mr. Speaker, Rushen deepened this analysis by proving that the post-2024 ECJ framework transformed electoral oversight into something institutional and enforceable. He showed that with the ECJ, which never existed under the old office, the ECJ has already implemented public complaint portals, online reporting systems, and law enforcement coordination and centralized mechanism for responding to breaches. These are not symbolic reforms government sitting on paper. These are operational systems already functioning in practice. And this is where opposition decisively wins the mechanism in this debate. Government never answered the most important practical question in this debate. What happens when political actors simply ignore recommendations? Because in their world, democratic accountability depends on hope. In opposition's world, democratic accountability depends on institution capabilities. Mature democracy across the world like India and South Africa believes and have done electoral commissions possess integrated oversight precisely because elections are too important to depend on fragmented moral persuasion. Democracy survives when institutions can respond quickly, cohesively, and decisively during moments of political tension. Second clash. Fragmented oversight versus coordinated governance. Government repeatedly treated institutional fragmentation as though it were inherent to democratic. Opposition proved the opposite. Kevin established that ECJ already possessed broad authority overlapping significantly the ombudsman responsibilities. The incorporation therefore did not destroy oversight, it streamlined and strengthened electoral governance. Rushen then demonstrated why fragmentation oversight weakens accountability in practice. Multiple disconnected institutions created duplicated responsibilities, democratic delays, institutional confusion, and opportunity for finger pointing. Government never comparatively explained why preserving fragmentation was worth sacrificing operational effectiveness. That distinction actually matters in this debate, because when electoral institutions appear weak, inconsistent, or incapable of action, citizens begin to lose faith in democratic process itself. People disengage from politics, voter participation declines, public cynicism deepens, democracy slowly erodes, not through one dramatic collapse, but through the gradual loss of confidence that institutions can fairly regulate political behavior. Now, on the matter of bias, government attempted to suggest that integration increases biases, but opposition dismantled that argument completely. Kevin demonstrated that the old structure centered oversight around one individual who could easily become politically attacked or accused of favoritism. By contrast, ECJ distributes authority across 9 commissioners with bipartisan representation and independent members often draw from the judiciary. That creates broader institutional legitimacy and stronger procedural balance, and government contribution becomes impossible to ignore. They asked this House to distrust one of Jamaica's most internationally respected democratic institutions. The ECJ has recently been ranked #1 in the Caribbean for strong electoral systems in the Caribbean, so respected that international observers routinely study its operation. Mr. Speaker, when we speak of this motion to justify government has not met their burden, we win this debate because our framework is capable of restraining political actors and to improve democracy in Jamaica. Thank you.
We thank the third speaker from the opposition team, from the teaching services team. We now call upon the third speaker, the reply speaker from the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining, to conclude the debate and to basically provide a strong summary on behalf of the proposition side. Hear, hear.
All right, so Mr. Speaker, we have sat and listened to a very engaging debate, and it is now my turn to highlight what took place during today's discourse, demonstrating why side propositions' arguments are superior. So, Mr. Speaker, the conversation revolves around an evaluation of the move to absorb the office of the PO into the ECJ, which we on side proposition believes was not the wisest of decision. So to this end, the clashes in the debate dealt largely around issues such as trust versus efficiency and independence versus integration, right? So let us look at how side proposition dealt better with this clash. So firstly, Mr. Speaker, for side proposition, we believe strongly that any risk to the ECJ's credibility is existential. We are of this opinion because of the premise that elections rely far more on trust and procedural correctness. On this note, our first speaker did an excellent job of highlighting how this move critically handicaps the ECJ and jeopardizes its well-established credibility. He explained that by seeking to quote-unquote be more efficient by collapsing the two distinct functions into one institution, we have politicized the ECJ's role. What does this mean? He explained that the nature of the role of the PO requires specific expertise. By merging, we then conflate the roles, which consequently exposes the ECJ to partisan controversy and weakens the appearance of neutrality upon which its legitimacy depends. Why is this bad? It is bad because it weakens democratic legitimacy, erodes public confidence in the ECJ, and threatens confidence in the electoral process, right? So we hear from side opposition now some very interesting arguments. They are trying to tell us that just because the ECJ investigates and makes recommendations, right, it performs the same function as the Political Ombudsman. The reality is every oversight body performs some or similar functions. The difference that they fail to clearly clarify is that the context and the degree and the extent to which they have these powers, they have not addressed that issue, Mr. Speaker. Additionally, they try to tell us that because we say we regret, that is automatically saying that we want to go back to the status quo. Mr. Speaker, we want to assure you that regret doesn't mean to go back to the status quo as it is. Regretting can also mean that you do not think the decision that you have made was the best because it didn't produce the outcome that you are expecting, or that there are problems involved the decision making. It doesn't mean that, for example, if you decided to go and buy something and that you don't have right now, and the product that you have bought, you don't like it, it doesn't mean that you want to go back to a position in which you don't have the product, if you understand what I'm saying. They are trying to tell us that because we regret, we want to go back to a reality where the PO's role was failing. That is not what we're saying. We are trying to tell them that we do not appreciate the move of merging. We feel that the appropriate measure would have been to strengthen the role of the Political Ombudsman, independent of merger. So, Mr. Speaker, what else did we hear from the side opposition? They tell us that they suggest that the commission of the PO, as it exists in the ECJ, includes 9-member body, which offer broader perspective, etc. The problem with this, Mr. Speaker, is that the composition includes 2 members from each political party, which already perverts any semblance of neutrality. Additionally, this not only makes decisions from the PO more politicized, but the fact that we have more actors makes decision-making slower, Mr. Speaker. Side proposition would have also included the fact that we can use, for example, advisory bodies bodies to advise the political ombudsman rather than having 9 different people to come to a conclusion. They also tell us that the decision to merge follows the strength of streamlining in a bid to bring about greater efficiency and save costs. However, Mr. Speaker, while this is noble on the part of the opposition, efficiency is irrelevant in the absence of effectiveness. What does this mean? It means that if your focus is to cut costs, but your methodology is poor, you are in turn causing more problems than you're trying to solve. In the context of this merger, poorly executed oversight harms governance far more than it saves funds. Mr. Speaker, we also want to tackle the idea, right, that, hold on. Yeah. We also want to tackle the idea that by merging the ECJ with the PO, right, the ECJ's credibility improves enforcement and compliance. While this might sound good on paper, it is not grounded in reality. The reality is that reputation and enforcement power is not necessarily transferable. It is context specific. What does this mean? It means that simply because the ECJ has built a solid reputation over the years, specifically in the context of electoral administration, does not mean that this reputation will automatically apply to the PO. Furthermore, political disputes are inherently adversarial, which means that the damage is unavoidable, right, Mr. Speaker? This therefore compromises the very credibility of the ECJ that the opposition is trying to leverage. So in closing, Mr. Speaker, I want to quickly touch on what was said by my second speaker. She pointed out that the fact that there is no real policy change, there's nothing that they have done to really strengthen and bolster the role of the PO. And the fact that they have put it in the ECJ indicates that they recognize that it needed to be strengthened. But we do not support that approach, and the government rests.
Thank you very much. That was the third speaker from the proposition team. Concluding our debate. What a debate this has been. Wow.
Yes, it certainly has been a great debate, and we need to give them a bigger round of applause. And just to put some context to it, it's not the views that were advanced, were not their personal views, but views, right? Views to ensure that we had a very rich debate, which we definitely enjoyed. So at this time, we take a break, and the judges will deliberate and return in a few minutes to announce the winner of today's match, which will advance to the quarterfinals. Well done, teams. Sorry to see one of you leaving, but it's the nature of the competition. Yeah. All right.
289 to 283. That is an indication of how strong the contest in this match was. A round of applause is definitely deserving to both teams. Ladies and gentlemen, we had on team proposition the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining, and they went up against the teaching services. They contested the moot that questioned whether or not the merging of the political ombudsman into the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, whether or not that has, represents something to be regretted. Of course, team proposition contends that it is to be regretted. They highlight the fact that the ECJ benefits from an elevated reputation and is regarded highly by the Jamaican citizenry and the global community at large. They say that this esteem is going to be reduced and adversely impacted by virtue of the rancor and the sort of challenge that will come about that will ultimately diminish its reputation because it now performs the role of the political ombudsman, right? Now, team proposition contends that it is precisely because of this elevated role that justifies it taking on or assuming the responsibility of the political ombudsman. They say that to have it otherwise would be to defend the sort of fracturing of responsibility or splitting up of responsibilities that are actually in harmony ultimately. They say overall that the mechanisms with respect to the legislation of the Electoral Commission of Jamaica does provide greater mechanisms for enforcing the rulings of the ECJ. Whereas in the counterfactual, meaning in what obtained otherwise when the two entities were separate, there was not a means by which the political ombudsman could force the offender to actually comply with their rulings. It was reliant on agreement and sort of concession, sort of agreement ultimately by the offending political actor. Now, team proposition contends that there are harms with respect to the efficiency with which the rulings can be brought forward. They point to a mechanism whereby one of the 9 commissioners can simply veto or raise a veto and ultimately block the investigation of alleged violations within the political arena. We found it somewhat concerning that that particular concern having to do a veto was not at all responded to by team opposition. And so we are led to believe that it does exist and it does potentially add to the slowing of decision making by the ECJ. That said, we're wondering how significant is this veto issue insofar as we've had in a short lifetime the ECJ, since it has incorporated the role of the political ombudsman, we've had rulings that have been averse to the interests of political parties already. So why then were the political parties whose representatives sit on the commission, the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, why did they not essentially activate the veto? So we wanted to understand what are the incentive structures that are at play that would cause this to happen and therefore inform us as to what is likely to lead to a frequent occurrence of the utilization of the veto so as to make it an even bigger concern. Okay? Now, the question of bias was significant in this match. Team proposition contends that the estimation and regard for the reputation and credibility of the ECJ is going to be significantly damaged by virtue of it becoming politicized, and the perception of the public at large will be as obtained in the world where it was not combined with the ECJ, the political ombudsman responsibilities, that it's going to suffer significant political hemorrhaging and bias will flow. Team opposition contends that the bias is going to be significantly reduced because of the mechanism by which the ECJ both investigates and delivers a ruling with respect to allegations in the political realm. They say to us that insofar as we're reliant on 9 commissioners to interrogate, to weigh the issues that are brought before it, and ultimately potentially to lead to initiate an investigation, ultimately to provide a ruling. That means that mechanism insulates the decision from perception surrounding bias and so forth, right? Again, at this point, the contestation from team opposition that the veto is going to be inimical to the delivery of the particular rulings that are desirable for the efficient promulgation of the democracy and other factors. The election integrity would have effectively reduced that particular outcome that team proposition contends will result. That said, ladies and gentlemen, we felt that insofar as we are caught up in a sort of a trade-off between efficiency and effectiveness, we felt that on that particular clash, we felt that proposition wins in terms of slower responsiveness because of the longer deliberative process, but ultimately we get better efficiency, rather proficiency and the effectiveness of the decision-making process by team opposition, decisions that are ultimately insulated from bias and negative perceptions by the public at large. Now, in the main, we felt that some of the questions asked in the round would have been more relevant had this mechanism where the ECJ now subsumes the responsibility of the political ombudsman, were that to exist longer, then we could see a little bit better the particular harms that result. But we felt that since 2024, between then and now, we wouldn't have had a lot of experience in determining whether or not there are substantial incidences that lead one to vote either way. So ultimately, this debate became largely on what is likely to occur as opposed to what has occurred already, right? Now, on the question of the kind of mood that we're dealing with, this is a regrets kind of mood, meaning we are looking at something that exists, be the inclusion of the political ombudsman's role within the ECJ, whether or not that is to be regretted. And moods that are about regretting something requires that the team that is regretting either just regrets outrightly and argues that what results from this new reality is particularly bad and leads to greater negative outcomes, or they may very well stand in support of the counterfactual, meaning the world in which the thing does not exist. We don't think that it is appropriate for the proposition team in these kinds of debates to tweak or to adjust the mechanism that exists outside of what is specified in the moot, and then having sort of improved on it, then argue that this is the improved mechanism that they're standing for. And so you will recall, ladies and gentlemen, that team proposition sought to make more effective the mechanism of the political ombudsman when it stands independent of the ECJ by giving it greater enforcement capacity. So in their world, they would adjust the legislation governing the political ombudsman, make it more effective, make it more, capable of demanding compliance by the political operatives. Insofar that that didn't exist, we don't think it is reasonable for proposition to infuse that kind of additional mechanism in defending what it is that they're standing for. We felt that opposition, on the other hand, argued fairly that, principally there are significant gains that materialize insofar as, for example, there is greater capacity within the ECJ that will inure to the benefit of the results having to do with the political ombudsman at large, and ultimately greater insulation from it being castigated as being biased, partisan, etc. That said, we do think that there is likely and potentially going to be some diminishing of the reputation of the ECJ overall. So the ECJ may very well sustain some kind of a castigation by the public, but we think that that castigation is substantially mitigated by the mechanism whereby you're reliant on 9 commissioners, many of whom are independent, and even with respect to the presence of the political operatives within the commission at large, there is a fair opportunity for both political parties to have their say before pronouncement is had by the ECJ. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, I remind you of the scores. 289 points. And that compares to 283 points. In an average debate, 283 points is a winning score. But in this debate, it was unfortunately not sufficient. The winners of this match in the octafinals round of the public sector debate competition for 2026 are from the teaching services. So we congratulate the teaching services on winning this debate, and we also similarly congratulate the valiant proponents of the moot, the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. A round of applause to them as well. The best debater in this match comes to us from the winning team. It's the debater whose volume was so intense that my granny in Westmoreland turned off her radio and listened to the speech that was being that was being delivered. It is, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, the first opposition speaker. So that is how this debate ends. The winners, again, congratulations to the teaching services team who stood in opposition of this moot. And again, well tried. Unfortunately, our defending champions, the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining, their journey ends at this point. All right? So with that, we come to the end, and we're grateful that you have participated in your own way by witnessing this debate. Please keep the conversation going. The matter is not done, yes? And we want the conversation certainly to persist across the society. We'll be back with you shortly with another match in the octafinal round of this competition.